When the DH position is selected, the DH altitude is displayed digitally in cyan in the bottom left corner of the PFD. The selectable value is between 0 and 999 feet. When the aircraft descends below the radio altitude for the value set, the radio altitude readout in the lower center of the PFD turns amber, and a box DH appears above the radio altitude readout. When the MDA position is selected, the MDA altitude is displayed digitally in cyan in the bottom right corner of the PFD and as double amber lines at the corresponding position on the altitude tape. The selectable value is between 0 and 19,999 feet. When the aircraft descends below the barometric altitude for the value set, the MDA readout changes from cyan to amber. The remaining AFCS controls are a couple of buttons on each pilot's control wheel and the go-around buttons on the power levers. Let's take a look at the buttons on the control wheels first. The red quick disconnect push button, located within easy reach of your thumb on the outboard side of each control wheel, serves two functions. It disengages the autopilot when pushed, and only the autopilot, not the yaw damper, and when pushed a second time, it clears the red autopilot disengage message on the FMA and silences the cavalry charge oral alert. If the autopilot is disengaged by other means, and that could be either automatically, manually with the autopilot button on the FGCP, as a result of disengaging the yaw damper, either manually or automatically, or by initiating a go-around with the go-around button on either power lever, this button still has to be pushed to clear the message and silence the oral alert. The other autopilot button on the control wheel is the Touch Control Steering, or TCS button. Located on the back side of the control wheel, this button is used to temporarily fly the airplane with manual inputs without having to disengage the autopilot. When the TCS button is depressed, a green TCS is displayed in the FMA AFCS status window for as long as the button is held. Shown here are the TCS operating parameters for the different autopilot modes. The final AFCS control that we're going to talk about are the two go-around buttons located on the side of each power lever. The first thing that occurs when either go-around button is pushed is the disengagement of the autopilot. A go-around is a flight director-only maneuver. Along with the autopilot disengagement, all active, captured, or armed modes are canceled, replaced with heading hold as the lateral mode and go-around as the vertical mode. During the go-around, the lateral heading hold mode provides flight director guidance to hold the aircraft heading at the time of go-around engagement. The vertical go-around mode provides flight director pitch guidance to fly a minimum safe pitch altitude. The go-around mode may be canceled by either selecting another vertical mode, engaging TCS, pushing the standby button on the FGCP, or re-engaging the autopilot. Before we leave AFCS controls, we should mention the two pitch trim switches. Although not actually AFCS controls, you should know that actuation of either the normal pitch trim rocker switch on either control wheel or the standby pitch trim switch on the pedestal will disengage the autopilot. Now let's turn our attention to the AFCS indications. All of the indications for the operation of the autopilot and flight director are presented to the pilots on the PFD, with some repeated on the ND. Unlike many other airplanes, there are no indications of selected parameters on any of the panels. They're all on the PFD or ND. All of the operating mode indications, as well as all of the systems messages, are presented on the flight mode annunciator at the top of the PFD. Indications for selected heading, speed, altitude, and navigation parameters are also displayed on the PFD and are co-located with the normal display of that information. Some of these parameters are also repeated on the ND. Let's first take a look at the display of the heading, speed, altitude, and navigation parameters, and then we'll finish up this module with the mode and message displays on the FMA.
The target airspeed is indicated both in digital and analog format on the PFD airspeed tape. The digital readout is located at the top of the tape, and the analog indication is represented by a bug positioned at the location of that airspeed value on the tape. The airspeed target value, as we have seen earlier, can be either manually selected by the flight crew using their ICP or automatically set by the FMS. The color of the digital readout and bug are either cyan, if manually selected, or magenta, if from the FMS.
Both target altitude and heading are set using the controls on the FGCP. Like the airspeed target, the altitude is represented by a digital readout and a movable bug on the altitude tape. Both indications are always cyan. The selected heading is also displayed as both a digital readout and a cyan bug. In addition to being displayed on the PFD's HSI display, heading information is also displayed on the MFD nav display when in the arc and rose modes. When using the nav source controls in conjunction with either the AFCS nav or approach modes, the selected course and the selected source of the navigation information is displayed, like heading information, on both HSI and the ND. The color of the display depends upon the source selected. It is cyan if either VOR or ILS is selected, magenta if the FMS is selected, or yellow if the offside FMS is selected. Okay, let's finish up our discussion of the AFCS indications with the flight mode annunciator, or FMA. The FMA is probably the single most important automation indication in the airplane. So let's take a little time to get more comfortable with the information displayed here. At first look, it can seem a bit confusing. So let's see if we can help cut through that confusion a little by looking at how the displayed information is organized into groups. The information on the FMA is presented in 3 rows and, generally speaking, 4 columns. The third row of information is pretty much dedicated to the messages when something is not working correctly, so let's set it aside for later. Of the 2 upper rows, the first column of information is related only to the ice protection system, so we'll set that aside as well. That leaves us with the remaining 3 columns of information on the first 2 rows. And that is where we want to focus our attention. The information displayed in the FMA's right-hand column pertains to the overall status of the AFCS. There are 3 blocks of information on the top line and 2 on the second. The first block of information in the upper line is where the engagement status of the yaw damper or autopilot is displayed. It shows yaw damp if only the yaw damper is engaged, and autopilot if both the yaw damper and the autopilot are engaged. The second block shows the status of the flight director for that side. For example, on the captain's FMA, if the captain is displaying the flight director bars, a green FD is displayed in this block. If the flight director bars are removed from display by pushing the flight director button on the FGCP, then this block is blank.